Okay, so these are the cards that I want to see nerfed if Blizzard comes out with more nerfs, and I don't want you guys to comment where are the buffs. We need buffs, not nerfs, because I'm going to cover that in a separate video tomorrow or the day after that. So just keep that in mind. These are just the cards that I think are too overpowered right now and probably need a nerf based on what I've played against and statistics on sites like Hearthstone Replay. So let's just jump into it and hope you guys enjoy. And if you have anything you want to add, please put it in the comments. So the first thing we have is Incanter's Flow. Incanter's Flow is probably one of the most problematic cards in the game right now, at least for Mage, because it helps snowball Refreshing Spring Water, also on this list, by the way. Oh, and no, I don't want every single card on this list to be nerfed, because, like, if it's for a specific class, I don't want both cards to be nerfed. I'd just like one card to be nerfed in a specific class, because then it would hurt too much, you know? But Incanter's Flow just snowballs too much. Like, we have Wild Growth, right, which is a really good ramp card, and it costs 3 mana, and at 2 it was seen as too powerful. Incanter's Flow is basically 2 mana, gain 25 mana by the time you draw your deck, and because of all of the draw, like Refreshing Spring Water and Arcane Intellect, and the other one, the Cram Session, you are probably going to draw through most of your deck. I'd say that on average it ends up being 2 mana to gain about 15 mana in value, but that's still way too much, especially if you play both. And then that compounds because you can do a lot of it in bursts. And the reason why it's different from Ramp is because Ramp, yes, you have 1 more mana every turn, but with this, you could have an opponent that's at like 27 HP and basically like kill them with Fireball, Mask of Cthulhu, and maybe with an extra minion on the board to hit them, and you kill them on turn 9. And because of that, I think that Incanter's Flow is pretty problematic, and just make it 3 mana like Wild Growth is, or say that it only reduces your next 5 spells by 1, or maybe next 10 spells by 1, so that way it can't snowball the same way that this one currently does, but if you draw cards, you can still accelerate your pace really quickly right after playing it. Next one is Refreshing Spring Water, and Refreshing Spring Water I actually don't think is as much of a problem as Incanter's Flow, because Incanter's Flow makes the cards seem worse. Because 1, you can sometimes gain mana crystals for playing this card and draw 2 cards, and 2, the cards that you draw off of this are usually better than they would normally be because their cost has been reduced by Incanter's Flow. So there are 3 main things I would do to nerf this card, and I do think that the cycle and the free draw 2 is kind of problematic, but other classes do have free or cheap draw 2s. It's when you gain mana crystals that it is a problem to me. So there are 3 nerfs for this. 1 is lazy, just increase the mana cost by 1. I hope they don't do that, but if they do, at least it slows them down. But the other 2, which I think are more interesting, are 1, refresh 2 mana crystals for each spell drawn, and then, like, in parentheses, up to the cost of this card. So if you reduce the cost of this card to 3 or 2 mana, you don't overload, or you don't get more mana than you put into the card. So that way you don't get hurt too hard. Like the other nerf would be just refresh 2 mana crystals if you draw 2 spells, just in total. So it doesn't hurt the card as much as that. And if you play Refreshing Spring Water for 4, it doesn't feel too bad. But if you play it for 2 or 3, it still feels good. You were still able to draw cards for cheap. It just doesn't gain you mana. I think that would be pretty good. The next one is Conviction. Conviction's really problematic, and I think it's one of the cards that makes Paladin super strong. Basically, I play this in the mid-game or as a late-game finisher, and it's a 1 mana do 9 sometimes, although usually, let's be honest, you're playing against a Paladin, it won't hit turn 9. But usually it's like a 1 mana 6 damage that gets to stick on the board. So there are 2 things that I would do to potentially nerf this, and I don't think it should be the mana cost, because 2 mana really doesn't affect what ends up happening with this card. I think that it should be give a random friendly minion 2 attack, so that way, even if you play it early, let's say on a Crab Rider, right? Playing this on a Crab Rider on turn 2 after you coin it out hurts a ton. But if you make this plus 2 attack, it will hurt less. It also snowballs a little bit less hard. The other option is to say give a random friendly minion plus 3 attack this turn. So it can be used as burst, but it's not super problematic for the next couple of turns. Because with this card, if you don't kill those buffed minions off immediately, you're going to take that same damage again. And let's say the same example with the Crab Rider. If you don't kill it that first turn because it's hard to kill at 4 HP, then it's going to hit you again for a ton more damage. And I just think it being a temporary buff for something this cheap in an aggro deck would still be good. It just wouldn't snowball as hard. Next, you have Hand of A'dal. Hand of A'dal is pretty simple. I would just like to see it go down to a +1/+2 or a +2/+1. because I think it's too strong. I'd rather see it go to a +1/+2 personally, because I just feel like pumping something up +2/+2 on the board and drawing a card is just a strictly better Scavenger's Ingenuity, right? Scavenger's Ingenuity is a 2-mana draw a beast +2/+2, and yes, it draws a specific card, it draws a beast, which you can synergize with, but it doesn't give you immediate stats on the board, and at the end of the day, it's still +2/+2 draw card. Just this one gets to happen immediately, it can give you a value trade, and it can basically win you the board, whereas the Scavenger's Ingenuity, admittedly, is very good, but takes a little bit longer to happen, and I think that that is the best card to compare this to, because they essentially do the same thing, just Hand of Adal is like leagues better than Scavenger's Ingenuity. Like, Hand of Adal is used in every Paladin deck that exists because it's so good, and it's also a form of cycle, but Scavenger's Ingenuity is only used in like a select few Hunter decks, and that just shows that this card is way more powerful. Obviously, there are other things like deck archetype, and this just fits better just in general because you can pump anything, not just a beast, but I do think that a nerf is in the works for this card. I also think that maybe a condition, like give a unbuffed minion +2/+2, or give a already buffed minion +2/+2, or give something with like 3 or less health +2/+2, or some sort of condition so you can't just drop it immediately turn 2. Because playing this turn 1, and it was especially bad with the Elder Attendants, when you just played an Elder Attendant turn 1, made it a 3/5 turn 2 that was very hard to deal with, and just used that tempo to win the game. I hated playing against that. I don't know about you guys, but playing against something like that where you just lose so much tempo turn 2 because of a 2-card combo is really oppressive, and I think making it +1/+2 would mean that it doesn't snowball as hard. Like, you don't take as much damage. Even though it's hard to kill and it'll stick on the board, at least you're not taking as much damage, and you can trade into it a little bit easier. The next one is My Yogg, and this one's just a personal thing. I absolutely hate the fact that a paladin has a 1-mana basically counterspell that is sometimes worse than counterspell because the card can do bad things for you, or pump up the minion or an enemy minion, or kill one of your own things or something like that. And I just don't like that. I just don't like the RNG and not knowing what's going to happen, because, like, I like Counterspell as a card. I think it's a well-designed card because it stops the opponent from doing something. They have to play around it. But My Yogg, yes, does give you something like Counterspell, but the RNG element means there's also this thing that you just can't plan for, and for it to be 1 mana and to do something totally crazy but also stop the person's original plan is just too much, in my opinion. And obviously it's more powerful now because Secret Paladin became good and the sword is really powerful, so obviously this card in a vacuum isn't the only problem. But, like, to be fair, I used to tech 1 or 2 copies of this into my Libram Paladin as well, if you go back into some of my videos, because it was strong back then and I recognized that. But yeah, honestly, this card I think is the least deserving of a nerf in Paladin. It's more of me just really disliking it in general, but if they choose to nerf it, I will be happy. The next is Warsong Wrangler. Warsong Wrangler, I feel like Hunter will need a nerf, just in general, because right now it's the 2nd or 3rd highest win rate class, and it just does way too much damage. Keep in mind, I actually don't think that Face Hunter is as bad as No Minion Mage, Rush Warrior, or Paladin. I think that those 3 things are up here in terms of power and, like, unmatchability, but Hunter's fairly close behind. Like, it is so close behind that you could theoretically clump them together in the same group, but it's like the gatekeeper to being broken. And if the other classes get nerfed, Hunter will be super powerful, and we need to address this. So, Warsong Wrangler, I think, should just give a minion +1/+1, because not only are you already getting a minion on the board, but you're also getting a minion that you draw specifically. Like, you get to choose the minion, and giving it +1/+1 would still be good. Like, a Trampling Rhino that's a 6/6 for 5 would still be good. Still trades into most things that you would need it to on turn 5. You just do 1 less damage, or trade into a minion a little less efficiently every now and then. So it wouldn't hurt it too much, but losing 1, maybe 2 damage, depending on how many Trampling Rhinos you play, over the course of a game in a Face Hunter deck could still be impactful and be the difference between winning and losing into, say, like a Priest or a Warlock or a Control Warrior or something. And I just think that if the other classes are nerfed, Warsong Wrangler should be addressed, because I think it's one of the most powerful cards in Hunter, and I actually keep it very often, especially into a slower matchup. Not into Hunter all the time because it's too fast, but into pretty much every other matchup, I keep this card because it curves out into a turn 5 play. The turn 5 play is insane, and I'd still keep it even if it was a 6/6 trampling Rhino. Next card is Stage Dive, and Stage Dive I think is a problem because I have a couple of cards I wanted to show you in the Warrior deck. It's going to be a little bit small, but bear with me. We have this, right? So let's see. Cards that can snowball with Stage Dive. 1, you already have a card that can pump the attack of Rush minions, which is the Parade Leader, which basically says every time you summon a Rush minion, give it +2 attack. So you already get attack that way. Playmaker, because you copy a Rush minion, sometimes you'll be able to just do this twice, which is quite problematic actually, because not only are you getting +2/+1 on one minion, but you're getting another copy of a minion that's +2/+0 essentially, which means you can trade in really effectively, and you already have several other ways of buffing up Rush minions. And then the last thing is cards like Samuro with a really good Frenzy ability. It makes it too easy to just wipe a board. Overall, I think a great nerf to this card would probably just be a +1/+1, or maybe make it 2 mana so it's harder to corrupt. Like, you'd still be able to corrupt it, right? But you couldn't just corrupt it turn 2 immediately and just jump into drawing a card and maybe curving out really well. At least at 2 mana, it would be a little bit clunkier to play. You couldn't play it after your turn 2 play or something like that, so that just might be nice. But making the corrupt +1/+1, especially considering it's 1 mana, I think would be better. Because, like, again, you go back to Scavenger's Ingenuity or even Hand of a Doll, right? And the difference is, this card is half the price. You still get to draw a card, but it's only 1 less stat. And yes, you have to corrupt it, but 1 mana is, like, super easy to corrupt, so it's fine. And the reason why I'd compare it to Hand of a Doll still is because even though you don't get immediate board control, it's going to be a Rush minion that you can use to kill a minion the very next turn. It's guaranteed Rush and removal. So I think that because of that, it does have similar board presence to Hand of a Doll. I just gave away the next card, but we already know. I talk about Crab Rider all the time. But yeah, Stage Dive, I think being a +1/+1 would be something that would be good. Maybe Troublemaker nerf and making the 3/3s not able to go face, because, I don't know, but when playing Warlock and if I twist together and then they just play Troublemaker and they just do 6 damage to my face immediately after I just wipe the board is super bad. And I think that not allowing them to go face would still give the deck a lot of damage, but the late game would be a little bit weaker, and I feel like this deck needs a weakness, because it's good early, it's good mid, and it's good late with Troublemaker and Alexstrasza, and it's arguably the strongest or the second strongest deck in the game, so I think it does need a nerf just in general. The next one is a class card. I want to go to the neutrals last. It's Hysteria. Hysteria is just probably one of the most efficient removals in the game, and the only reason why I don't think this would need a nerf is because technically you can play around it. You can play around it by playing a ton of small minions that minion might hit to make it less likely that it hits the correct target. You can keep the amount of attack and health on the board set in a way to where you won't get punished too hard. But still, overall, 3 mana to usually kill the strongest minion along with a couple of other minions is quite strong. I think making this 4 mana would be best. I know it's a lazy nerf, and I actually, of all of the cards on this list I think need to be nerfed, I think this is probably the least necessary, because both Priest and Warlock are both in a really bad spot right now. I just think that if the other more aggressive decks are nerfed, Hysteria will be really strong and will keep the opponents from closing out the game. So this is more of a preemptive nerf, similar to Warsong Wrangler. That'll just keep things in check and keep, you know, Priest and Warlock from, like, dominating. Ironically enough, Warrior would, or Warlock would, like, kind of counter Priest, so that kind of keeps it in check, but they both will run Hysteria, and it's kind of problematic, but this one's kind of iffy. Next one's Crab Rider. Crab Rider we've talked about all the time. The general nerf of everybody is, there are a couple of ideas, actually. Make it a 2-mana 1/4, make the Wind Fury a battle cry, get rid of one of the keywords. I already said a 2/3, but maybe make it a 3-mana 2/4, so that way it gives a little bit more stats, so it's a little bit stronger, but it still costs 3 mana, so it's a lot easier or harder to just immediately snowball, because coining this out on turn 2 and then pumping it in some way is just almost unbeatable a lot of the time. And obviously it's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's so little removal for this card turn 2 that it actually is a really early snowballing mechanic that can win games or like set the motion for a game to be in the favor of the Crab Rider player by turn 2, which doesn't really feel that good to me. And I just hate this card in general. So yeah, I think that making it a 2-mana 1/3 would be pretty good. But then again, there are other ways that you could, in fact, nerf this card. And I'd love to hear what you guys think about this card, because I've actually heard a lot of people say this card doesn't need a nerf. It's the buff cards that are the problem. But I think that the buff cards are the problem because this card is able to survive on the board long enough to get buffed. So it's like what came first, a chicken or the egg situation, right? Is it strong because it can get buffed, or is it strong because it survives one turn almost guaranteed, which means that it can get buffed the following turn really consistently? I don't know. I'm not on the balance team. I just think that this card is the problem, but if they end up nerfing like Hand of a Doll and Stage Dive, which would indirectly also nerf Crab Rider, maybe Crab Rider doesn't need a nerf. And the last card is Mancrick. I also think like Alex Straza would potentially need a nerf, because this and Mancrick and Talon are the most used cards in the entire game, because they were given for free, to be fair, but Mancrick is literally kept in like every single mulligan whenever possible. It spawns a 3/10 that goes face, and all you have to do is draw some cards and get lucky enough to draw it. And with cards like, or with decks like Rogue that can draw cards really, really quickly, or Hunter that has a guaranteed way of drawing Mancrick, so you basically have 2 ways of drawing it, or Olgra, I guess, technically. It's just really, 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 really powerful. So one of 2 things to nerf this card would just be make it a 3-mana 3/3, so it's a worse play on turn 3, because they're really just hoping to get Olgra, or make Mancrick's enraged state or consumed by hatred state, this one. You can see the 3/10 right there. Make it like a 3/8 or a 3/7. So it's a little bit easier to deal with if it comes out, right? Even maybe like a 3/6. So that way the stats aren't insane. It's still 3 damage directly to the face. It's something the opponent wouldn't be ready for, so they wouldn't know how to play around it like immediately. But it would be a lot easier to deal with. Maybe making it 3/6 would be a bit too harsh, which is why 3/8 might be good, but I still think 3/6 would be totally balanced, because right now it's just so strong. Like, oh my gosh, this card is basically, if I see it in my opening hand in a deck where I run this card, I keep it. If I have the coin, I'm coining this out on turn 2 to try to get Olgra as fast as possible. And I feel like a card like this, that's used in almost every deck, should be looked at a little bit. And the last thing I wanted to actually talk about here was something in Legends of Runeterra. And my friend texted me about this because he plays Legends of Runeterra a lot, whereas I play Hearthstone, and we talk and compare games sometimes. And he talks about the nerf philosophy of Legends of Runeterra. Let me find the text real quick. I know this isn't professional. I should have had it ready to go, but I forgot I wanted to talk about this. But yeah, Legends of Runeterra patch 2.5. And in their website, in their article, they have a couple of things that they look at in order to determine whether something needs to be nerfed or looked at. And basically, meta decks are defined as something with a 3% or better play or more play rate, which means that it's something that they might look at, or something with above a 50% win rate. And it represents the play rates, and here are the play rates below, and some decks are really, really powerful that probably will get nerfed. And that's their general philosophy. As a rule of thumb, anything of 55% win rate or a 15% play rate are our normal benchmarks for corrective balancing. And when you look at decks, like if you just go to Hearthstone Replay right now, and we look at the statistics of the meta from Diamond through Legend, based on those statistics, Rush Warrior and Paladin should be nerfed, and probably should have been nerfed already. Also, in terms of play rate, if we go to popularity and just go across the board, to be fair, across all ranks, this might not necessarily be an indicator because they're only 12% play rate. But if you look at Paladin, anything above like Plat, or if you're in the high ranks of whatever rank you're in, like Plat, Diamond, Gold, 1, 2, or 3, or 6, 7, 8, the play rates are ridiculous. Like at the in the areas where there are a lot of players, or players are grinding the hardest, it has the highest play rates, and I think that indicates something. And then also, if you look at cards and play rates of specific cards in certain decks, if a card is being played in almost a third of all the decks, or a little more than a fourth of all decks, they should probably be looked at as well. And I feel like, as a general rule of thumb, looking at something and being like, okay, if a card or a deck has like a 15% roughly or greater play rate just across the board, or in like the most grindy ranks, then maybe it should just be nerfed, just as a general rule of thumb. So that way, if, you know, people might not necessarily see behind the scenes stuff, at least they know that that's the general rule that they're going for. And they already teased a Ticketus nerf, because they said if Ticketus becomes a 15% play rate card, they would potentially nerf it. And up until recently, it actually was. It's not anymore, because people started realizing Warlock is pretty bad. But up until recently, it was at about 15% play rate, so Ticketus might also be nerfed. It's not on this list because that is a topic for another day. Ticketus is a card that arguably should be nerfed, because it's very unfun to play against, but at the same time is not overly like strong. If you actually look at the win rates of the decks that it's in, it's, where did it go? It's actually fairly low, 52% win rate, other than like Lord Jaraxxus, the other Warlock card, and Soulshear. Like every other card that's played a similar amount or more has a higher win rate. Literally every single card except Hysteria, which again is another Warlock card, which is crazy to me. So yeah, that's why I don't think Ticketus necessarily needs a nerf balance-wise, but it does need a nerf fun-wise, because nothing sucks more than watching your win conditions get burned. But yeah, that's basically on the cards I'd want to see nerfed, how I would nerf them, and why I would nerf them. Tell me what you guys think below. I'd love to hear it, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. See ya.